Today we're talking all about working with a managed security service provider, also known as MSSP. But before I bring out our guest, Mark, who's on video right now, I want to make sure that everybody does know, don't be shy. This is why we come to you with these live events and webinars. We want to answer your questions. But however, you may notice that everyone is muted, but that's okay. Please enter those questions into the chat box located at the top bar of the Teams webinar window. And if you have any technical issues or need any other assistance, please feel free to put that into the chat as well. Now, if any of you haven't heard of Sikich before, we're an accounting, advisory, and technology digital consultancy, helping to digitally transform the world we all work in. Now, Sikich has many specialty areas like business and modern workplace applications, including ERP and CRM, managed services, IT infrastructure support, and so much more. But today we're going to be really focusing on our cybersecurity consultancy, which is where Mark Punzaruto, uh, who works on our cybersecurity team here at Sikich, he'll take it away from here. Thanks so much, Mark, for being with us today and educating us more about MSSPs.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for the introduction, and thank you for joining. I know everybody's busy. There's a ton of webinars and a lot of content going on, so taking a few to spend some time with us about this is greatly appreciated. As Michael mentioned, I'm Mark Punzaruto. I'm a director with the Sikich cybersecurity practice. We do a number of things within the cybersecurity practice, but at its core, it's helping to protect our partners from things like risk and fraud and help them manage some of the very complicated cybersecurity topics that are out there, from vulnerability management to penetration testing and other types of technical security testing, as well as understanding risk within your business or having to deal with compliance. So there are a number of things that we can help with in our practice, and our experience is very wide, but we like to pride ourselves in being able to work with a business to understand what your risks are and then help you customize a solution to go forward to meet your business objectives. So talking about MSSPs, managed security service providers, I think anytime that you're going to go into a conversation, it's important to talk about the why. Why are we talking about this? So what I have on the screen right now is a direct quote from the Department of Homeland Security through one of the departments that's CISA, so it's commonly referred to as, or the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Their website is cisa.gov. And for small, medium businesses, they have a campaign called Stop, Think, and Connect. And this is one of the main quotes off of that, their initial presentation content. So if you wanted to go look at their website, I left the link at the bottom. It's cisa.gov/stopthinkconnect. And it's all about what to do with cybersecurity, where to start. So the big mission statement here is for small business owners, business growth is the name of the game. That's what you're trying to accomplish. And technology is going to help you do that. So not only do businesses rely on technology to perform daily functions, but the internet provides easy ways for businesses to stay connected and informed. However, with those conveniences comes increased risks. Many of the crimes that occur in real life are now facilitated through the internet, and there's a wide variety of them. Things like human trafficking, credit card fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, stealing intellectual property. There's almost an unlimited number of crimes. Anything you could do in person, you can almost facilitate online. No country, industry, community, or individual is immune to cyber risks. No single government agency, company, or individual can solve our cybersecurity challenges. We all have to work together to secure cyberspace. So I think this is a very meaningful quote. What it's saying is that we're all in it together. We've all been exposed to a number of technologies to help us grow and maintain our businesses, and they've helped us immensely over the years. However, with that comes risk, and we all need to work together to address it. So what are some of the things that happen that would maybe drive you to start talking about an MSSP? Well, threats change all the time. 24/7 by 365. Attackers don't stop, criminals don't stop, and your business has priorities. So sometimes you need a partner. Every enterprise, every organization, period, can utilize an MSSP, whether they're small, medium business or major enterprise. Both use them, and maybe for different reasons and different objectives, but there's a time and place. The main purpose, from our perspective, is we like to bring enterprise capabilities to small, medium businesses, large businesses that perhaps don't have enterprise security capabilities. So one of the biggest benefits of using an MSSP is supplementing what you have. When you have a major enterprise, they have their own security department. Well, SMB needs that too. So an MSSP, what are they? They're a strategic partner. They're one that's going to focus on managing your security program, maybe some components of your cybersecurity program. There's a wide array of services or products. There's tons. I think every day we're inundated with new acronyms and rehashing of old acronyms, but things like Security Operations Center for alerting, endpoint protection, managing your network or network devices, maybe from a staff perspective, something like a virtual chief information security officer who's going to help you maintain your program over time, vulnerability management, patch management, the list goes on and on and on of potential service and service offerings from an MSSP. I would say most parts of your cybersecurity program can be outsourced. In some businesses that makes sense, in others it does not, and that's topic for future slides. So to get into the meat and potatoes, what are some of the primary considerations of working with an MSSP? Your organization's decided they need to expand their cybersecurity program. Maybe they don't feel like they're doing enough, or they don't feel like they're doing enough in the right areas, or they would like to just do better. And you're trying to determine what the right approach is to doing so. Build versus buy is commonly used terminology. So when we say things like, when does it make sense to work with an MSSP, really the core of that argument is, or the core answer to that question is, what are you trying to accomplish? Do you have an objective you're trying to accomplish? And are you going to do it yourself, or do you need assistance? Building your own program is always an option. It does make sense for many organizations, and for many others, due to resources, investment, budgeting, priorities, focus of the company, there's many reasons that they look to use an MSSP. So when does it make sense for your business to work with an MSSP? Do you have goals or time constraints around what you're trying to accomplish for your project? If your cybersecurity program is creating a level of risk that's unacceptable to your business, maybe you have contractual compliance requirements, something like that, that might drive a necessity to use one. An MSSP can help you get traction very quickly on some of those areas. What are your common risks? Every time you outsource, there are definitely risks. There's risks to building and there's risks to buying. With all vendor engagement, there's definitely risk to address. It's important to remember that outsourcing doesn't eliminate risk. It may transfer a portion of it, and it may reduce some of the risk due to perhaps the MSSP doing a very good job at some things that you weren't accomplishing. So that depends on the organization, but I think it's important to identify what those risks may or may not be, and what the impact of those risks a relationship with an MSSP may have. What are some of the common rewards? With all risk is reward. The better the reward, usually the higher the risk. When you work with a good partner in the MSSP space, the goal is to minimize the risk that's there and create a maximum amount of reward. So working with a partner who specializes in a field, maybe it's a specific program or control that you would like to implement and need help with, or perhaps it is an industry. Those specialized MSSPs can help you rapidly move the needle for your organization's cybersecurity program maturity. And that directly relates to the level of risk that you're left with after all the security is in place. And for the last one, because there is risk, how do you protect yourself when you're doing this? How do you manage the relationship? And when you decide to outsource something strategic within your organization, how are you going to track and monitor those risks over time? A lot of times in the small, medium business space, I've noticed over the years of cybersecurity consulting that risk is a difficult discussion. We accept the risk as a very common phrase. However, it's not that common that most organizations that are quick to state that actually understand the risk from end to end. So I think it's important to have a very serious conversation around all the pluses and minuses that can possibly come out of a relationship. So when you consider working with an MSSP, the first thing you must do is internally is to determine the need. Why do you need this? What are your business drivers? What is the budget for your services? All of these factors weigh significantly into future decision-making processes. You may have a need that is very large as an organization. Your budget may not be, or the other way around. So it's important to define these things up front. I like to use SMART goals, right? So creating a SMART goal will help you ensure that you have a clear set of objectives. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of a SMART goal, SMART is a common acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So it's a statement. When you make a statement, meet those criteria, it makes it much easier to understand, digest, monitor, track, break down into operational components and steps. It allows you to be clear about what you're trying to obtain from something. The next step from the business perspective is to look at a cost-benefit analysis, or a CBA. So cost-benefit analysis is exactly what it sounds like. You're looking at the financial and operational impact of option A in comparison to option B. So this goes back to the build versus buy discussion earlier. Does it make sense for your organization to implement the services on your own, internally, using your own staff, or to use a partner? One of the biggest mistakes I see when onboarding or working with an MSSP from the business side is people not accommodating for all of the cost associated with some of the programs that they'd like to roll out when they choose to build. It can happen on the MSSP side when they buy as well, but typically working with a vendor, they are also looking to be transparent and like to put that in front of you as such. So when you're doing a cost-benefit analysis around building the services, it's important to accommodate for some of the soft costs that commonly escape things. Products are a cost, equipment is a cost, third-party professional services and support is a cost, warranties are a cost. But what about labor dollars in training and keeping that staff up to date? What about the half an FTE it may require to do one of the tasks a year? So there's a number of other pieces that come along with that. Typically, I find that security controls and program components are not things that you can just chop up and add to existing employees. I don't know what everybody's situation is, but I would say in the 25 plus years I've been working very hard. I've yet to have a job where I was sitting around for 25% of my day and waiting for some of these responsibilities to fall onto my lap. So it's important to accommodate for that when you are looking at the cost-benefit analysis. Adding services to your internal IT or information security delivery, that'll take bodies. And those bodies will need to be trained initially over time, including if platforms and applications change, your business changes. There's a significant amount of time and investment in allowing them to maintain current knowledge where they can do a good job. Third, define your rewards. So what is the reward for working with an MSSP? The threats are changing every minute. A professional whose job is to focus on cybersecurity will help keep you up to date with those changes, inform you, assist, make recommendations. It's common to identify rewards in categories such as cost, availability, operational capabilities, cyber agility, which is an important topic, which will all benefit an organization at different levels. These levels are going to depend on the inherent risk of your organization. So what risk are you at by being a company who does what you do? And their level of cyber maturity currently. As I mentioned before, large enterprises may use MSSPs, small, medium businesses may, and there's plenty of factors that are similar and many that are different for both of those organizations. So for example, in a small, medium business, the maturity of cybersecurity may be very low. Maybe there's an IT person who's helping out, or maybe there's one security person for every 150 employees. And you could use a little bit of assistance there. When you go into a larger organization on the high end and you're looking at enterprise companies, Fortune 100s use MSSPs too. Why? Because they've determined it's usually more cost effective to outsource some components of their programs. So identify the rewards that are specific to you and your organization, and preferably do that internally so that way when you talk to vendors, you can listen for some of that and you can ask the right questions. Next, identify your risk. It's going to be a theme throughout the presentation, the risk and reward. With all rewards, there's always a risk. Outsourcing is no different. It's important for an organization to understand that they still hold the risk related to the controls, the security, the partnership, and their environment. It's your organization, and a partner is brought in to help you. All organizations should take the time to properly identify the risk in advance and ensure the adequate controls, reporting, communication with the MSSP so that you can track and understand it over time. A good MSSP partner can help you understand where the risk is in a transparent manner and help you navigate that. So evaluating outsourcing a security service. So there's a lot to talk about on this slide. Your organization has decided to discuss relationships with MSSPs. What next? You've identified all your objectives, goals, and needs, and you've pulled together a list of partners that can help you meet those goals. So what do you ask them? It's hard to know sometimes what's important until you've burned yourself in the past. I think everyone in the leadership position has touched the hot stove once, twice, 100 times in my case, probably. But after burning my own hand a number of times, there are a few common things that are really important to understand about how an MSSP relationship works. There's also going to be some jargon to get up to speed on. Not a whole lot, thankfully, because the cybersecurity industry is already ripe with it. But there are definitely some key factors and terms and things that you need to understand and be comfortable with to get the most out of a relationship. So first being availability and support. So do the SLAs meet your requirements? Well, let's start with what is an SLA. On the small, medium business side, it's a mixed bag as to how many people understand the service level agreement, which is what an SLA stands for. As you go higher into organizations, mid-market to enterprise, typically ones start to develop procurement and other departments, SLAs become a lot more commonplace, but it's important to start and understand this. So an SLA is how the MSSP is going to define the threshold for the management of services. So I'll give you an example, and we are going to talk about this some more, but an example could be that in the event of a support call for whatever service, they have an SLA of 1 hour to acknowledge and 4 hours to provide a response. So that's an example of what an SLA is. It's a way to set a standard and provide accountability to a standard for service delivery. IT management will have very similar things. So if you had like support operations centers and stuff like that, you may be familiar with an SLA. It's something you should discuss with all of your vendors where it's applicable. If you're outsourcing critical security patches, another example, SLA could be that they're installed within 30 days and or communicated to your organization why they can't be within 5 days. So you could see another example of what an SLA would be. And this is your way of defining the relationship based on your goals and objectives so that everybody is clear and transparent about the expectations. We could also talk about what metrics and reporting are shared. As part of a contract, as part of a relationship, you should be not only defining what the guardrails are for that relationship and be very explicit about it to the best of your capabilities, but you also should be discussing how you're going to communicate together to talk about the relationship over time. Are you getting reporting on how the SLAs are being achieved on a periodic basis, for example? If there are issues that are going on, Is the vendor, the MSSP, escalating those to you within a timely fashion, or are you to them? Are you communicating to the MSSP? So you want to work together to ensure that metrics and reporting are worked out and expectations are defined in advance. So skills and capabilities. Oh, sorry. So support hours of operations coverage. Are they 24/7, 365? Do you need that? If you do need 24/7 by 365, would you look at vendors that are 8x5 by 200? This is a significant factor when it comes to cost and capabilities for some vendors. The same could be said for multi-language support. If you're a global organization that has to speak 35 languages to accomplish your goal, that's going to be an important criteria to working with a partner. So you want to ensure the MSSP is capable of supporting your business. As a service provider, the MSSP should be able to discuss what kinds of reporting and metrics are generated and shared with you. You see these examples of these, such as live dashboards. Maybe they have a web portal. There could be some monthly reporting, could be periodic account reviews. There's a number of different examples. Skills and capabilities. The goal of working with an MSSP is to supplement your organization with services and knowledge, which are going to reduce risk through maturity of cybersecurity program components. So I said all of that, but the too long didn't read is they're supposed to make you better. Do their skills meet or exceed what you require? If you have individuals who are more skilled than others, there's a conversation to be had around selecting the right vendor. This could mean a lot of things, though. Could be specialized in an industry. Retail, multi-unit locations, things like that have a different set of requirements and operational needs than perhaps a giant skyscraper office building. So looking at specialized industry MSSPs when it makes sense, or general ones, or maybe you have certain technologies that are going to be required for them to work with that are not commonplace, a mainframe, for example. Or maybe you just need someone with general security knowledge. It really depends on the services being performed and what your organization's needs are. It's one of the primary reasons for having those conversations internally in advance and defining this is to help make sure you select not only the right vendor, but one that's going to be the right vendor for a long time, as long as you need them. Is the MSSP capable of scaling with your business? If you consolidate locations, you grow rapidly, perhaps you do a bunch of acquisitions or you land some very big partner contracts, can the MSSP help you along your path to some explosive growth? I think that is critical as well. Any vendor relationship really needs to work with your company to achieve long-term goals. And it's important to ensure that organization is going to be able to keep up with you. Other examples could be maybe you have a strategic plan to expand into another country or other locations. Again, it's important that the partner you choose can be a long-term partner of the business. As onboarding and vendor management isn't the easiest thing to do, once a partner's integrated, expectations are set and defined, it's usually ideal to keep them there as long as they're performing and as long as your business objectives stay in alignment with the need for those services. Risk and compliance. So as we discussed before, there's always risk to outsourcing. Is your decision to outsource going to increase or decrease your risk? Do you know? Are you aware where it will increase risk and where it may decrease risk? Have you talked about those items and come up with plans to mitigate some of that risk? How will you review and update those services that you're enlisting to align with your organization's risk appetite over time? As your company matures, obviously things like risk management start to grow within the organization and get more formal. And you need to make sure that you're selecting a vendor that's going to be capable of supporting that. So you want to look 2-3 years down the road most of the time. Do you have any specific regulatory or contractual requirements? HIPAA, PCI DSS, agreed upon procedures, requirements to be get a SOC 2 Type 2 annually. There's a number of things that can be impacted by your decision. If so, it's really important to talk to your MSSP about how they're going to be able to support you in those areas of concern. Some of those things, such as, let's say, PCI DSS, are very prescriptive in how some of the security controls need to be managed. And if so, you would want the MSSP to make sure they were doing it in a compliant fashion on your behalf. Now, this brings us to the last item. The last item is onboarding. I think it's a pretty odd one to see here. It's awfully specific compared to the other high-level categories, right? Availability, capabilities, risk. Those are very general, high-level topics, and onboarding and offboarding is very specific. I could make an argument that it's part of availability, support, and capabilities. However, it's something important that I wanted to call out because it needs consideration. It's something where I've burned myself multiple times in the past. So let's say that your organization is reasonably static. You have 20 employees in an office. The same 20 employees have worked there for 5 years. No one quits, no one leaves. Or maybe it's just 5 of you. In any of those scenarios, onboarding and offboarding doesn't appear to be a significant issue. You have the same number of systems, devices, locations, so on and so forth. You don't have to worry about that rotating door of onboarding and offboarding. But in many businesses, I would say the vast majority of businesses, they're pretty agile. Things change quite a bit. So what is the process and the timeline, for example, to shut down a location or a user? So for example, if someone's terminated, how long does it take to disable that user, and what's the process to do it? If that is a control that the MSSP is managing on your behalf. I personally have seen SLAs in those contracts where it says they can take up to 48 hours to deactivate a user account. Is this acceptable in all cases of termination? As a security professional, I'd say absolutely not. Could it be in some others? Perhaps. So how are those situations managed? Again, we're going to go back to the SLAs. That is how you define the relationship in black and white. So it's very important to talk through the operational processes and determine, which of those are going to have thresholds that you require. Does the service they provide rely on custom hardware or software, or is it something that's off the shelf? Common example of this is network management. You see a lot of custom boxes, a lot of purpose-built bespoke devices, these single computers that get dropped in your environment and do a number of security services. Or off the shelf, something like a Fortinet firewall or a SonicWall firewall or a Cisco. Right, so there's advantages and disadvantages to both. But if let's say that your vendor has a custom box that they decide to drop in. What happens if you decide to change the vendor? Do you have to buy all that hardware up front? Is it part of the lease agreement? How does that work exactly? If it's not necessarily a bad thing to have proprietary hardware at all. Some custom-built devices are often used for very specific use cases and can benefit you depending on your industry. However, there is risk associated to devices being tied to a vendor. So you need to have the discussion and you need to talk about it. Also, from a security perspective, how are those hardware devices secured and tested over time? How is the hardware supported? Commercial vendors for networking devices, for example, have very robust security programs to identify weaknesses and patches. How is this happening on the customized or proprietary security solution? Will that solution be as secure? How often are they testing it? It's not all security, though. Can someone else take over managing the device? What will the cost be if you have to switch out of a proprietary solution or a platform from a vendor? Those are important considerations too. So getting onboarded and offboarded. And then if you decide to transition service, what happens then? Do you own the devices? If a service isn't paid for, it's in dispute, or maybe there's some other issues like the MSSP had a security issue, had an operational issue, there was an internet outage, who knows? But can that impact you? Can they shut you off? Would you lose the ability to run your business? This is a risk too. If someone's managing, let's say, an MPLS network or a mesh network with the AVPN in between a lot of your locations, if you didn't pay that bill or there was an issue or something happened with that vendor, would those stores still be able to communicate? What's the path forward to correcting that? Is there an SLA defined for getting you back online? Again, with the MSSP scenario, have you scrutinized the security and service delivery methodologies for the MSSP to ensure they can support you during the times that you need them? Do they have a plan for things like training, replacement of resources, knowledge transfer on your account? What is the level of training required for most entry-level individuals who are going to be working on your system environment? What about the most skilled? So I think it's very important to understand their onboarding and offboarding processes and requirements for employees and people who will work on your account, just the same as it is for you onboarding a new site or individual at your company, because it will have a direct impact on the relationship and the services that you get over time. So what are the big benefits of an MSSP? Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less expensive to work with an MSSP than to build your own department. Commonly, a good MSSP will be providing a service that is hard to replicate internally for small to mid-sized businesses at the price point it's delivered. In some environments, it is significantly an area of opportunity to rapidly supplement your current organization's capabilities in terms of cyber. Your organization may not require a team of high-performing individuals in cybersecurity, or perhaps you have a couple and they could use a hand with some of the day-to-day activities. So that will allow them to focus on more critical or important business objectives. Right sizing for your business. If you don't need a full-time CISO to accomplish your goals, why would you hire one? I certainly believe that all organizations should have someone dedicated to cybersecurity, and they should be on the executive level. However, do you need a full 50 hours, 60 hours a week based on the complexity or threats present in your organization? Maybe. That's for you as a company to decide. Maybe you do need that person, but just not today. But you need to start somewhere and you need to evolve over time. This is a perfect reason to work with an MSSP. Help you achieve a rapid level of maturity in your environment in an area of cybersecurity. Cost savings, very important from the business perspective when talking about working with any vendor. So typically, and this is not in all cases, but generally speaking, for a lot of the common services, like let's say level 1 to security operations center, total cost of ownership is typically a lot less than building your own, especially on the SMB to mid-market size. Other things too, things like licensing, hardware, software support can all be outsourced or some hybrid model. What this allows is optimization of all the operations within small to medium business so you can get back to focusing on what's important, your business, by supplementing what you have with the capabilities that are present in an enterprise organization to the degree that you need them. And that can be starting out at a very small amount and just block and tackling on some of the basic issues in the beginning, and then annually achieve a higher level of maturity in other areas. Or it can be over 3 to 5 months, we're going to wildly revolutionize the cybersecurity program within the company. It's really able to be catered to your business and allow you to budget effectively. Also, things like licensing, hardware, support, all that I mentioned before, there's overhead with managing all that. If anybody's ever been through an Oracle or Microsoft license review, it's reasonably painful, having to onboard and offboard new people and buy new licenses or upgrade accounts. And if that's something you don't need to focus on and can outsource, it can provide a significant amount of efficiency within your operation. Also, threat actors, they don't sleep. I mean, the world, it's 5 o'clock somewhere is pretty common to say. So is 8x5 monitoring going to be okay for you? In some businesses, perhaps it is. SMB, you can expand to 24/7 by 365 monitoring and defense very quickly. So it's a matter of what are you ready for today and how far do you need to go? But going to a 24/7 by 365 staffing model to defend against cyber threats is a fairly costly endeavor to build on your own. And it definitely takes a lot of time and dedication. So how are you going to get the most from your MSSP relationship? This is not set it and forget it. Communication is absolutely key to making this relationship work. How often are you having status calls? Do you and your team know who to call and for what, when? How often are you all touching base? The MSSP is an extension of your organization. So it's important to stay in constant communication and ensure that everyone's on the same page. Businesses change, vendors change. You may have had other vendors in your organizations change, which impact security things that your MSSP needs to be aware of. For example, are your business priorities still aligned with the MSSP services? Allowing the MSSP to get to know your business will allow them to help align security with your business objectives. And you're going to do that through communication. Planning and accountability. So only you own your risk. You got to set your outcomes and expectations accordingly. Your organization is who will be in the news if something happens. Your MSSP is there to support you and help ensure that the likelihood of that is as little as possible. You still need to act accordingly, though. So making sure you're asking the right questions and being visual and being engaged and understanding what the activities are. Again, it's not something where it's like that food dehydrator commercial from the early 90s where you just set it and forget it. It does require involvement. The services are going to evolve over time, as are your needs. So you definitely need to meet regularly and discuss what has happened, what is happening, and what is happening in the future. Periodically, you're going to stop and evaluate the relationship. Is this doing what we need it to do? And do we need to add, retract, change, modify service delivery, SLAs, anything like that? The goal is to tune the relationship over time so that it's beneficial for all and your organization is getting exactly what you'd like out of it. Contracts should support businesses with working with a vendor to change metrics or the objectives as needed. There should be a common methodology that's used to track these metrics. And you can work with the vendor, the MSSP, on defining what this means to you. But ultimately, open communication is key, and it's okay to provide feedback. As long as it's professional, both good or bad, this is how problems get resolved. So a real partner should be very happy if you're communicating with them that something's going on that you're not okay with. That will allow them to help you and to do better. So, and that's all part of setting and tracking realistic outcomes. You're going to look at the contracts, define the SLAs, KPIs, which we'll talk about in a moment. And you're going to have these periodic communications to review all that information. You're going to track these metrics over time. You're going to talk about them. And you're going to work with the vendor to ensure that that those numbers and metrics stay exactly where you need them to be. And honestly, the MSSP should be coming to you as well and saying that they've made other observations based on their experience in the industry or with cybersecurity as to new threats and new risk and how you should be handling those, at least within the context of the services that they're providing your company. So how do you measure performance of the vendor and the service over time? You're going to do this with metrics and KPIs. So again, more jargon. If you've been in the project management space or a mid-size enterprise, these are probably very commonplace. And smaller organizations, I find it very common that perhaps they've been heard of at a high level, but to find them applied to cybersecurity is typically more rare than it is common. In mid-size to the enterprise space, these are very common. So let's talk about them because you have to really understand these in order to get the most out of your relationship. This is to me the core of defining how you're going to engage with a vendor and what the expectations are. So a metric. This is a data point that's relevant. It's a very general definition, but it's important to highlight that data. We all know what data is. To have it means you need to collect it, or you need to have it and you need to analyze it. What data are you going to look at, though? You can come up with a million different pieces of data around the service or IT, but is it relevant to what your objectives are in measuring something relative to the MSSP service? What are some examples of these, I'd say common metrics? So just to get your brain going and thinking about what different metrics are, number of tickets that are opened in a month. So depending on the support that you're getting or the type of service you're getting from them, this may or may not be a thing. Monthly ticket average time to respond. So over the past 30 days, what was the average time to respond to a ticket? So this is giving you, the SLA is defining the expectation, and the metric is the actual data that's highlighting whether or not they're meeting the SLA. Max time to respond to a ticket in the previous 30 days. So again, it's a single data point. I think that's the important thing to grasp from a metric, is that a metric is a data point. A number of metrics can be pulled together for analysis. Patches. So let's say you're using a vendor to MSSP to install security patches on your systems. What's the average days it takes to roll out critical operating system patches? Another one that I didn't even put on here, but is, I think, important to mention is, do they capture customer feedback or have satisfaction surveys? If you're working with a large MSSP or even a mid-size or perhaps a boutique one, if they're capturing customer feedback and doing continuous improvement, and they have satisfaction surveys where you can look at a CSI or Net Promoter Score or whatever it might be, to properly gauge how other folks in your industry who are using their services or feeling about the service, that can also be a metric that perhaps matters to your company. So key performance indicators. There is a difference. They do seem very much the same in a lot of ways, and it is easy to get the two of them confused. But a key performance indicator is a defined threshold and expectation, right? So you're going to set this threshold to determine if a metric is good or bad or needs further investigation. Just because a KPI isn't met doesn't mean it's something bad, right? It's not an automatic negative, but it means someone needs to look at it and understand why. Number of factors why a KPI may or may not be met, but it's important to know when you're not meeting them, because that means that there's something to review. And a good MSSP is also going to alert you of some of these issues, hopefully in a proactive fashion. So as I mentioned on the previous example, if their SLA is to install all security patches on an operating system within 30 days, and they only have 5 days to tell you that they can't, what you're doing is defining a threshold for both a positive and negative outcome that you can track. So if you were to find out within 5 days they couldn't be installed, then you would, let's say, take 15 days as a company to determine what the right path forward is, and then you can communicate back to the MSSP and they can work with you on a resolve. Some examples of some things where I've seen that come up are end-of-life operating systems. If you have some specialty hardware or software requirements and you have to use Windows XP or Server 2003 or something along those lines, where perhaps the patches aren't available anymore and there is risk and there are vulnerabilities. That's just one really common example. It's really important also to make these SMART. So I use that acronym again. You want them as close to that as possible. And the goal is, you may not be able to, for example, time bound everything, or you might not be able to do, you should be able to be fairly specific about most of them. There may be one of those letters that's hard to do in some scenarios, but you want to try to achieve that objective. So some examples of some KPIs would be 100% of systems have critical patches installed within 30 days. That's a threshold that you can use a metric. You can analyze metrics and determine if it's within a threshold. 88% of tickets are responded to within 2 hours. Average time to answer support cases has decreased 12% in 3 months. All right, so we were able to make some very explicit and very specific responses to some of the metrics and the results that we may see, and at the same time, we're setting a benchmark for the organization's expectations. So the recap, we talked about a whole lot. When you decide to engage an MSSP, there is a thoughtful process to determining how to set up your organization for success. All right, so first we want to identify what your organization wants to gain from the relationship. Saying we don't know what we don't know is acceptable as well. Perhaps you need help identifying what you want to gain from that relationship. There are plenty of partners, consultants, technology providers that can help you figure out what you need as well. But it's important to first set that groundwork and fully understand what it is you're trying to gain out of the relationship. Second, you're going to define the organization's objectives in a very clear, easily trackable method. This is one of the areas that I see probably the most common sort of fall apart because it can be difficult if you haven't done it a number of times. Again, if you have issues with identifying the need and clarifying that, or defining what your objectives are and making them easy, trackable, SMART goals, that's where someone with a ton of experience and having worked with MSSPs, as a CIO or a Chief Information Security Officer, or at some MSSPs even, can help you dig through that and figure it out. Next, you want to discuss your objectives and requirements with vendors. This could be an RFP, phone conversations, request for quotes. Could be a number of things, but it's important to communicate them clearly and using language that you both understand. I've responded to a lot of RFPs, and one thing I could say is about a third of them don't really describe what the business's objectives are. So it's important to, when you're going to look for these vendors, to properly define this so that everyone understands what the objectives you have are. Next, you want to evaluate the responses to your requirements that the vendors have provided against your business objectives. So if we're talking RFPs, this is evaluating the responses. If we're talking, quotes and conversations, this is asking the right questions and then obtaining the answers and then coming back internally and talking about them to see who had the best response. You're going to have quite a bit of, I would anticipate somebody who hasn't worked with an MSSP before or not frequently in the past would probably be surprised at the different processes and paths that an MSSP may take to onboarding or addressing a specific concern. Some parts of a methodology for service delivery are going to remain the same all the time because it's the way that business is done and it's the most efficient. However, the approach to maybe architecting the solution or something along those lines may be very different because that's all going to be very dependent on people's past experiences. You want to work with a partner. You want to work with your partner to set up the reporting, key metrics, communications cadences. You want to define this like a long-term engagement. If you onboarded a new direct report, would you set up a normal cadence of one-on-one touch bases? Would you set up things with human resources such as performance evaluations? Would you run reports and look at work they've done to evaluate how great it is or maybe areas of opportunity? You need to really treat this partner like an extension of your organization. They are a department. They are a employee. Maybe not legally, but in terms of the requirements around communication and working with them and understanding the expectations. And finally, I think it's really important to periodically assess the status of the services performed by the MSSP, not only with these KPIs and metrics, but also on occasion, just sitting back and talking internally around, do we need these controls? Do we need to evolve our business? Have we added technologies that are going to require us expanding these services? So we're currently paying for some services to help reduce risk. And then we added 20% to our technology stack in a cloud environment, but their services don't extend into the cloud. Do you need to extend those services? Do you need to find a vendor who perhaps can manage both for you? I think it's important to have those discussions periodically. Again, not set it and forget it. It's something that is going to require some discussion over time. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael. And if there are any questions, you can please drop them in the chat. And thanks for.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mark. Really appreciate it. I don't have any questions for you, so you must have really covered it all here.
Well, if any do come up, contact information is present on the screen. Please don't hesitate to reach out at any time via email or phone.
Perfect. Okay. Well, no questions for you now. We're getting out of here about 5 minutes early. Thanks everyone for joining. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out directly or to info@sikich.com. Mark's email is also here as well on the screen. Thanks everybody, and we will see you all next time.